This is my first QCrypt conference. I found it exciting. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to talk about two works. One joined with Carl Miller, another joined with Kaimin Chang and Xiaoli Wu. And I will explain what physical extractors are. So let me start with the motivation. And I will talk about what do I mean by randomness. So randomness means different things to different people. And why is it difficult to get randomness? And why should we consider quantum approach, and especially untrusted device quantum approach for randomness? So I want to claim that randomness is secret, or secrecy is randomness. So a secret is something I know, but if you want to know, you have to guess. And a perfect secret is something that I know for sure, but then for you to guess, you have to randomly pick one. Any possibility is equal likely. So randomness is secret. So let me be more precise mathematically. What do I mean by randomness here? So if I have a n-bit string x, and I say it's random to a random system E, a quantum system E, if x cannot be perfectly guessed from E. So randomness is relative in my framework. And for perfect randomness or uniform randomness, what it means is that the joint system of the string x and the environment E is in the tensor product of uniform distribution on x and the environments on local system. So that's perfect randomness. And in general, I will quantify a random source by these two numbers, n and k. So n is the length of the binary string x. And k describes how random it is with respect to the environment. So for nk source, the best guessing probability for the environment to guess x correctly is no more than 2 to the minus k. So when k is precisely n, then that's just uniform randomness. And when k is strictly less than n, I call it weak randomness. So we are going to construct protocols, and the protocols have errors. And by error, what I mean is the deviation of the joint system x and E from the ideal perfect situation of uniform randomness. So it's the trace distance of the joint state xe from this fixed state. And I will use the terminology true randomness to denote a family of states where the error tends to 0 when I increase other parameters in the protocol. So true randomness is almost perfect randomness in the asymptotic sense. So we need randomness, and we need a lot of it. We need randomness for cryptography. As I claimed, randomness is nothing but secret. And it's monetary secret. It's any secret can be derived from the initial random number that we choose. We also need randomness for running fast randomized algorithms, such as weather forecast. And we need randomness to do gambling. And I suspect we need a lot of randomness. So I talked to my computer security colleagues, and I estimated maybe 1 terabyte a day. And when I gave a talk at Microsoft, somebody pointed out that maybe this is even an underestimation. And it turns out that every internet packet had a number that's supposed to be random. So the central question that we are studying is, so how do we get randomness, get true randomness, and know that we are getting it? Yes?
I have a question. Is 1 terabyte per day a worldwide demand?
Worldwide, that's worldwide. Yeah. But we are not always getting the randomness we need. And computer security people have identified many vulnerabilities in the current methods being used. So my colleague Alex Holloman and his co-authors, they downloaded 65 million public keys from internet. So they didn't try to break every individual key, but they looked for share factors. It turns out that about 1.5% of those keys share a factor with another key. And that's not supposed to happen if the primes are picked uniformly random. So the lesson is that there are just not enough entropy to start with for those computers, and maybe economics also plays a role. There are only a small number of device makers for making those routers and devices, and probably 80% of them are in Taiwan. And they use the same method, the same source, like system boot time, and it then ends up with only a much smaller space of random numbers to choose from. And we also know from the newspaper that there are potentially backdoors, both in hardware and software random number generators. So my colleagues concluded in their paper, ultimately, secure random number generation continue to be an unsolved problem in important areas of practice. So that's the motivation. We need randomness, and we are not always getting it. And why is it difficult? It's partly because we can prove that there's no algorithm that by sampling one sample from the random number generator and can determine that this is uniform random or not. There's no such algorithm. And this is illustrated in this cartoon. So Dilbert needs some random number, and so his random number generator spits out a sequence of 9s. And so it doesn't look random to us, but this sequence of 9s has the same probability of occurring with any other sequence in a uniform case, in a uniform distribution case. And it's also a deeper question about our world, because it's entirely possible that the whole world is deterministic. And at the same time, quantum mechanics is correct. So I said again, it's compatible that quantum mechanics describes what we observe, but at the same time, maybe there's a higher being, there's a magic book describing every experiment that is to be done and every outcome that you will be observing. So therefore, we have to make assumption. So we have to make assumption that the whole world is not deterministic. So now the question becomes, if the world is not deterministic, could there be almost perfect randomness? And the alternative situation is, so we are stuck in a world that only weak randomness exists. So mathematically, the challenge of getting true randomness is because, so at least in this classical theory of extractors, because we need multiple sources, multiple weak sources. So computer scientists started studying how do we get true randomness from weak source of randomness in the 80s. And the beautiful theory they came up with is extractors, randomness extractors. So in this theory, the weak sources, they are modeled by mean entropy sort. So the weak sources are described by, besides the length, then also the mean entropy, describing the best chance of an adversary guessing it correct. And an extractor is a deterministic algorithm that takes in those weak random sources and output, hopefully, true randomness. And as long as the assumptions on the sources are met, then the mathematical property of the extractor will automatically guarantee that the output is truly random. And there are many very smart ingenious constructions and almost optimal constructions, especially in the case of seeded extraction, meaning that one of the weak sources is a much shorter but otherwise perfect randomness. In that case, we have almost optimal construction. And in some other cases, like these two sources are neither is perfect, but they're independent. In this case, it's still a very active research field. So this theory is very rich and is still a very active area in theoretical computer science. But there's a problem. There's a fundamental limit that this theory cannot overcome. That fundamental limit is that we need at least two independent sources. So in 86, Sensa and Varzani, they observed that deterministic extraction is impossible. So by deterministic extraction, what I mean is that there's only one single source. After that, you apply some deterministic algorithm and output some bits. So they show that with just one source, even for sources that are highly random, extracting one bit is impossible. And in general, we need two independent sources. But we know it's actually a very simple observation that there's no algorithm, like given two samples, and you can decide if these two are independent. Okay? There's no algorithm for doing that. And in reality, it's probably very hard to guarantee that too. All right, so I talked about classical theory, this beautiful theory, but requiring two independent sources. So how about quantum? So for quantum, because in quantum mechanics, the axioms of quantum mechanics already have built-in randomness. So generating randomness is actually very easy. And we prepare a state, a single qubit in the process state, and we measure it, then we get a perfect coin flip. And in fact, commercial products are already available. And, but then we need to trust those devices. And trusting quantum device would imply independent source. So if we trust quantum device, we certainly can produce perfect randomness, and we can produce independent sources. So this is a product from ID Quantic. And I just learned this morning from the brochure that at least one other company called QTools also has a random number generator. So I never had any of those devices, and so I wish someday I could open it up and see what's going on there. But certainly, for it to work, or for you to use it, you just have to trust it. Okay? But how do we know it actually works? Besides trusting the founder of the company, trusting the company doing what it claims to do. But suppose we really want to be sure, then how can we know that it works? So we are classical beings. We can't stick our fingers into the cage of Schrödinger's cat and then say, wow, this is beautiful cat state. Right? We can't do that. We may just kill or save the cat, but we can directly verify a quantum state. And a question arises, are we willing to trust the manufacturer or the agency that certify the product? And even if we are willing to trust them, and then the devices may just not be reliable for a long time, and we still are not sure. We may not be sure that it's working according to specification. So that motivates the study of untrusted device quantum cryptography. So what exactly do I mean by untrusted quantum devices? So here I draw some black boxes. Those are quantum devices. And so we are going to interact as a user of those quantum devices. we will interact with those quantum devices through classical means, classical communication. And we may have to be prepared that the devices might have been manufactured by adversaries, or maybe they are so imperfect that I have to be careful not to allow adversaries to exploit their imperfection. So I don't assume anything, how it works inside. That's why I joke it's a black box. And I actually, in our work, we will assume that they may be entangled among themselves and maybe entangled with an adversary in a way that we don't know. So now the question becomes, given those devices, and sometimes we have no choice because we may have to buy those devices from a company that we don't trust, then can we still reap the quantum benefits using those devices? And the answer is yes, we can. We don't like it, but we still have to work with it, and we can make it work. So there's an exciting area of untrusted device quantum cryptography. Started with QKD, and Myers and Yao were among the first to consider, and Barrett, Hardy, and Kent made it, took a different approach. And there are many recent works. So now our goal is to create and expand true randomness using just one single classical source and untrusted quantum devices. And emphasize is one single classical source. That's our goal. So now I'm going to move on to describe the model and results. And I will start with what people have done, and then move to what we have done. So there are two lines of research that inspire our research. The first is randomness expansion, pioneered by Kovac, Roger, sitting there, and in his thesis, and then a later paper has more material. So the goal for randomness expansion is to start with some perfect randomness, but at the end we want to get more of almost perfect randomness by making use of untrusted quantum devices. There's a sequence of works proving classical security or quantum security in restricted models. And quantum security was first proved by Varzinani and Vidic in 2012. And another amazing property their analysis shows is that one can actually get exponentially more output randomness compared with the input length. So it's quantum secure at the same time exponentially expanding. So that's the first line of research that inspired ours. The second line is randomness amplification, started by Roger Kovac and Rena. So they were motivated by a very deep question. Are there fundamental random process in nature? And they model weak randomness as something called sensor Varzinani source. This is the source that I described earlier, that it's not perfect random, but it's highly random. And actually conditioned on, so this is a sequence of bits, so that for any bit I, this ith bit has certain randomness conditioned on the previous bit and some environment information. So this bias epsilon describes how random xi is. If epsilon is 0, that's perfect randomness. So they show that starting with SV source, and if it is random enough, when epsilon is small enough, then we can output one almost perfect random bit. And an important improvement later by Gallego shows that any epsilon, as long as is bounded from above by one half, you can amplify the randomness by outputting one true random bit. And there's a recent paper by Brandau and co-authors. It greatly reduces the number of devices. So those work, they also make an independence assumption between the SV source and the device conditioned on the environment. So those two lines of work were before ours. And so here I'm going to present a model that we call physical extractors. And it unifies the previous two models. So there are 4 components in this model. The protocol itself is deterministic. So we users, we are running a deterministic algorithm. And our model is quantum mechanical, so the adversary is quantum. And it's all-powerful quantum. There's no assumption on its computational ability. So the adversary may be the person who prepares those devices. And so therefore, those devices might be entangled among themselves and may also be entangled with the adversary's local system. But we do have an important assumption that impose a limit on the adversary. So we assume that once our protocol starts, then adversary cannot talk to the devices. Okay, the third component is a set of devices. They are not interacting, so that's another important assumption, and it's necessary. So if they can talk to each other, then it will just be one device, and one can prove that one device you cannot do anything. You cannot get security by using one device. The fourth component is this classical source. So again, we are using both the length of the source and also its mean entropy to characterize it. And the mean entropy is with respect to the adversary plus the devices. In other words, this K means that the adversary and the devices together will not be able to guess what the input X is for more than 2 to the minus K probability. And we need this fourth component. We need to have something in the world that the all-powerful adversary does not know. So if the adversary knows everything, then we are doomed. We can't get secrecy. Okay? And that's not hard to show either. So let's look at expansion and amplification and see that they are special cases of physical extractors. So expansion is nothing but seeded extraction. In other words, the mean entropy K is precisely n. So this is a perfect randomness. And of course, in this case, our goal is that the output should be much longer than the input length. Amplification is a one-bit seedless extraction. By seedless, what I mean is that the input is not perfect. So K is strictly less than n. And in the work done by Roger and Rana, and also the authors, they consider one-bit extraction and the source, they limit the source to be some kind of SV source. So our framework is in a way more general, but on the other hand, in previous work, the security may be against supra-quantum adversary, meaning only line signaling, the security may apply to an adversary who is constrained by line signaling principle. But here, we are more restrictive. We only consider quantum adversary. Oops, okay. So what are the goals for physical extractors? We want to have security, and we want to have unconditional security and quantum unconditional security. And we want to have high quality. That means we want to minimize errors. And there are two types of errors. One is when the devices are honest, we should pass them, accept the output with overwhelming probability. And the other type of error, that we want to minimize is, so when the devices are trying to fool us, so we should minimize the chance of being fooled. Right? Or in other words, accepting output that is not of desirable quality. So two types of errors to minimize. So the third goal is to maximize the output length, and ideally outputting all the randomness that are kind of hidden in the devices. And I say quote unquote all because it's not clear to me, and it's one of the problems, open problems, that what quantifies the maximum amount of randomness in untrusted devices. So the fourth goal is to be able to handle all classical sources of arbitrary small mean entropy. And then we hope to be able to tolerate device noise. In other words, in reality, devices are imperfect. So we hope that in this case, we can still pass them with high probability, and then the output is still of the desirable quality. And we want to do things efficiently. We want to minimize the requirement on quantum memory. And we also want to minimize the number of devices doing our job, because remember, we need to ensure that they are not communicating during a protocol. So that may increase, enforcing no communication is a cost that we hope to minimize. So therefore, we want to minimize the number of devices. And computationally, we hope to be efficient. So let me describe the first set of results. This is done by Carl Miller and me, and on the seeded expansion case, or randomness expansion problem. So our protocol makes use of two devices, and it achieves exponential expanding. So the output, the input has k bits, the output has capital N bits, which is an exponential function of k. So S is a constant. And it's quantumly secure. And so those attributes match what the Vazirani-Viklik approved in 2012. So our output is also is cryptographically secure. What it means is that the error as a function of the running time or the number of rounds, the running time of the protocol is negligible. So the error is a negligible function in the running time as opposed to inverse polynomial in the previous protocol. So there's a trade-off between the error and the output length. So for any constant t and any constant s, as long as the product of these two constants is no more than some universal constant, say 1/2, then the combination of this error and that output length is feasible. And note that this is a negligible function. This is slower than any inverse polynomial in N. And the security analysis shows that the protocol is robust against a constant level of noise. And only 1 qubit of memory is required for a device. So the two devices, they can talk to each other in between a basic operation, one round. So therefore, they can establish entanglement in between rounds. So we only require them to store 1 qubit at a time. And the proof is new, and the building block can be many choices of games. Only 5 minutes? OK. And the second result, this is seedless extraction. So this is done by Chang and me and my former student Wu. So here we use just one single mean entropy source. And the source can actually be known to the adversary. This may sound counterintuitive, right? So if the adversary knows the source, how can it be secure? But remember, we have an assumption that once the protocol starts, the adversary cannot communicate with the device. And the mean entropy K can be arbitrarily small. And so what we accomplish is actually reduction of seedless extraction to seed extraction. So syntactically, seedless extraction is harder than seeded extraction. So our reduction is from a syntactically more difficult problem to easier problem. And again, we allow noise in the device, and there's a trade-off between error and the number of devices. So putting these two sets of results together, we can obtain unbounded expansion. So here I draw two sets of devices. Each one set. So those two devices is doing exponential expansion, and this is also doing exponential expansion. So you could make use of the output of the first set as the input of second set, and vice versa. So this protocol is very natural. It was considered before by Fair and co-authors. And we show that this protocol is secure using a lemma in a Changshu paper. And I should point out that unbounded, so by doing this, we can output arbitrarily long output randomness using only 4 devices. And doing unbounded expansion using a constant number of devices, it was first pointed out, it was first proved by Kujian and Yuan in last year. And our protocol is, so we show that this works and it's robust and only 4 devices are needed. So if we combine those two protocols together, we have this protocol that starts with a mean entropy source where the mean entropy can be very small, can be a constant. And then at the end, we can output arbitrary long output bits. And it's almost perfect randomness. And the error is almost optimal. So 2 to the minus k would be a lower bound on the error. The error has to be larger than 2 to the minus k. And we can almost match that. It has application in key distribution. So robust untrusted device key distribution was first proved by Varziani and Vidic in another paper. So we can translate our randomness expansion protocol for QKD. And so the additional property we have is that the total amount of randomness we need to start with can be polylogarithmic of the output lengths. So in a situation that randomness is really precious resource, so this protocol saves a lot of randomness. I'm going to skip that. I want to point out that the Changshu paper may also be useful for mitigating the freedom of choice loophole in Bell test. Because in Bell test, we need to make sure that the input for the Bell test is uniformly random. So if we don't have that initial perfect randomness to start with, then we cannot directly use our weak source to do Bell test. So our protocol that extract almost perfect randomness from weak source can be used to mitigate this loophole. I say mitigate because it's impossible to close the loophole. It's all possible that the war is deterministic. So I'm going to skip this part, and I promise to give you open problems. And I think I started maybe 5 minutes late. Really? Okay. Okay. So, but let me just mention 2 open problems. You have seen it, yeah. Okay. One problem is there a perfect physical extractor? So by perfect, what I mean is that every parameter is optimized simultaneously. Okay? So I describe several parameters. Right? And it's not clear to me if there should be a perfect one. So maybe there are inherent trade-offs among those parameters. So finding out those trade-offs would be great. So second general problem is there a general principle that can translate classical security to quantum security? So all the protocols I've seen, we either don't know it's quantumly secure. So all the protocols we know, it has both classical security and quantum security. So is it possible that for some protocol, there's a range of parameters that guarantees classical security, but not quantum security? Okay. Or maybe there's a very general principle that says that once you have classical security, you automatically, under this principle, you will get quantum security. And that's very plausible to me. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
So my question is, do you think there can be a proof to say that the only randomness you can do is in a randomness expansion protocol and not the randomness creation protocol? Like, will you always need either some seed or some, like, can you prove that you cannot create randomness from nothing?
Right. So I think in our model, yes. So we can prove that simply because if you don't have a classical source, then the university will know everything, right? So therefore, so we are deterministic algorithm. So it knows what's the first question we are going to ask, and it knows what answer will make us happy, right? It knows that when we are going to accept. So it becomes a zero-sum game situation, and has full information. So the university will win by making us happy, or either we accept deterministic output, or we always reject. Yes, it has to be some secret that the university doesn't know. Otherwise, we're doomed. Yeah.
For the unbounded expansion with this cross-feeding, how much needs to be generated on each side before you can feed it in to the next? Or
that's an excellent question. Okay, so that protocol is a very intuitive protocol, and I don't claim it is optimal. So I didn't have time to talk about the more detailed open problems. So one of them is, what is the minimum number of devices that can achieve unbounded expansion? So we know it's no more than 4. Is it 3? Is it 2? Or maybe is it under noise is 3, but without noise is 2? It's open problem. And I suspect that probably something more clever can be done. And in that more clever protocol, maybe it's not what you just saw in that, yeah, okay.
Maybe you can because you have many also experimental groups at QCrypt, so maybe you can briefly comment on how far this is still from an experimental realization. I think it is very far. That's
an excellent question.
Comment on that.
Okay, so I certainly hope that our work has made it much closer. And I think you mentioned in your talk that estimating the noise, that we can actually produce reasonable key rate. And I haven't done the calculation yet, but I think in a very, very rough estimation, I think we can bring down, in expansion case, so we can make a noise. By noise, I mean the difference between the perfect, say, CHSH success probability and what your device can make. I think as long as this gap is more than the gap between the optimal quantum and classical score, our theoretical result will guarantee you that the output is random. And actually, this part is not in the published paper, is something forthcoming. But for QKD, as far as I know, there hasn't been any experimental demonstration of fully device-independent QKD. And I believe that our paper, actually maybe our forthcoming paper, will put that into realistic regime.